1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
It's amazing when you look at somebody's story, the path that they have taken before getting to this point where we get to know them. Todd Moss is on the phone. Gosh, I was just reading his background. God, what an amazing background he has, and he's such a talented writer as well. I know some of you are already fans of Todd Moss, and I promise I won't take up too much with this elaborate introduction I want to do here. It's not really that elaborate. Todd is the CEO and Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development, a Washington, D.C. think tank. He's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State from 2007 to 2008, and was responsible for diplomatic relations in 16 West African countries. His new book is called Minute Zero. It's a thriller novel. I know some of you are familiar with the other books that he has written, and I believe this is featuring the same character, I believe, if I have that right, Judd Riker. Am I right about that? Todd Moss. Good morning, Todd. How are you?
Good morning. Great to be on the show.
And where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
All right. You like Washington? Aren't you a New York kid? Where did you?
I grew up in Rochester, New York, but I've been living in Washington for quite a while. I love it. I know the rest of the world thinks that Washington, D.C. is nuts, but it's actually a pretty good place to live.
and Africa is really, really mysterious to the rest of us. The only thing I know of Africa I learned from Busch Gardens. So.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Americans, they just hear about wars and crisis in Africa, and they think that the place is falling apart. It's actually not the case. There's 54 countries there. There's a couple of places that are having trouble, but most of Africa is actually doing pretty well, and becoming much more important to the United States, both for national security and for economic reasons. So we're really seeing the U.S. get more and more involved in Africa, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to write a thriller for regular Americans set in Africa.
And your work as a diplomat, is it reflected in your writing? Are you expressing in general thoughts about the world and how we treat each other, that kind of stuff?
Well, a lot of it is about how American diplomats interact with other parts of our own government. Most of the intrigue is not necessarily with foreigners, but within the government, the different agencies fighting with each other, trying to outflank each other. And I certainly experienced that, and I drew on that experience for the novels. The State Department, the White House, the Pentagon, the Treasury Department, they all have different ideas of what we should do in different places, and that all comes to a head during a crisis. So I wanted to take readers, inside the White House Situation Room during a crisis, or into the basement of one of our embassies. When something's going wrong, the United States has to act, and to hear those conversations and that fighting that goes on.
It's just that when you think about all those things, and then you think about what the president's job actually is, we have no idea what the president actually does. What is Minute Zero? I don't think I've heard the term before. I mean, I read a definition somewhere in my prep material, but what is it?
So Minute Zero, you haven't heard about it before because this is the first book about it. It's a moment in time when what seems stable is suddenly completely unknown. It's when a dictator who maybe has been in power for a couple of decades, all of a sudden it looks like a moment of change might happen, and nobody knows what's coming next. We saw it in real life in Libya when Gaddafi fell. We've seen it in Egypt. We almost saw it in Syria, and we almost saw it in Zimbabwe in 2008 when Robert Mugabe lost a re-election bid. But rather than conceding defeat, he decided to stay and fight, and he's still in power today. And I used that episode from 2008 as inspiration for Minute Zero.
And so that's when the rest of us, the United States especially in our case, would get in there and do something that would be in our best interest or in their best interests. And how is that determined?
Yeah. Well, U.S. government and U.S. officials always try to act in, they don't always succeed, but they're always trying to act in the best U.S. interests. And sometimes it's not clear what that is. A good example of this might be, if there's a military that we're working with on national security, but that same military maybe overthrows a democratically elected president. Is our interest in fighting terrorists today, or are we trying to support an ally and a democratic ally for tomorrow? That kind of tension is what my first book, The Golden Hour, is about during a coup in West Africa. But the United States government is not a charitable organization. We're there. The idea of the government is that we're supposed to support U.S. national interests, always first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. And you show the strengths of children in the book, especially that one piece where the military came in and the parents were killed, but the little girl was surviving, and she had thoughts of going to America, and she wasn't hysterical at that time. She had garnered herself together.
Right. So I wanted to create three-dimensional characters with history that readers could relate to, and so that you could also understand the motivations of actors. Why do they behave the way they do? Why are they trying to do things? And especially people working inside our government that may sometimes try to buck the system. And certainly Judd Riker, the main character, he's an outsider inside the U.S. government, and he's not always sure of that what he's being asked to do is the right thing, and that's the challenge that he faces.
I think somebody with the intimate relationship that you've had with Africa, you could write a story like this and not be trapped by the stereotypes that somebody who doesn't have that intimate relationship, somebody who just knows what they've read in books or from Busch Gardens like myself. I'm guessing that because of your close relationship with the continent, that we don't get a skewed view, and in fact, it's not even a negative view.
Well, I think all authors bring their own biases. I certainly tried to write about a continent. First book it's set in Mali, second one in Zimbabwe, two countries I know pretty well, and I certainly wanted to paint a complex picture of countries that both have difficulties, but that also are very exciting, optimistic places. And I definitely wanted to draw on the experience inside government. Not just imagining what the White House Situation Room looks like, but having sat there and sat through meetings and fought it out in the trenches, trying to share a bit of that with readers. So when they read about a crisis in the newspaper, they get a little bit of a sense of why our government does what it does, and sometimes why we do things that don't make any sense.
And geographically speaking, you've given me a better perspective of where the countries are in Africa and the terrain.
Well, I wanted to do a little bit of that. I mean, nobody wants a geography lesson when they sit down on the beach to read a thriller. But I did want to talk, I did want to set the novel in a region of the world that most Americans don't think much about, but that is becoming a lot more important. Our military is getting much more involved in the corners of Africa. American companies are getting much more involved in Africa. And as that becomes more normal, it seemed like why not have thrillers set there as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I have a copy of the book. It is a hardcover, a full-size book. It's called Minute Zero. It was sent to us by Todd and his publisher, I think. I don't know who sent it to us, to be honest with you. But I'd like to give it away. So call me right now if you want the copy we have. The rest of us have to go buy it. The number right now, if you want this copy, is 622-9622. Todd, how do we get this? Let me start with websites. Do you have a website?
Sure. My website is toddmossbooks.com,
okay.
And it's available on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and at your local bookstore. And hopefully people won't have trouble picking it up.
Did you have to run it through the test with your former colleagues in Washington, or does that stuff not matter?
If I was still in government, I'd have to have it cleared by the lawyers to make sure I'm not divulging classified information. But since I've left government, I don't have to do that. I'm still careful. I don't want anyone to accuse me of revealing anything that might harm the U.S. But I think that adds a little bit of the intrigue to the story.
All right, very good. Todd, thank you for being on the air with us. Definitely come back. Well, hopefully we can get you on for a longer conversation one of these days.
Great. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. We will be right back. Ocala Magazine Radio is up next. This is WOCA Ocala.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. The Marines may not be looking for a few good women to serve in some frontline combat roles.
The Corps is reportedly expected to ask the Pentagon to keep certain positions closed to women. The report comes after the Marine Corps conducted a months-long simulated combat experiment. Among the